All right, welcome everybody to another episode of the Inside In Tennis Podcast. Mitch Michaels, host of the show, all part of the Believe Network with tons of great sports content, tons of great tennis content on this show as we're gearing up for an exciting month of February as the 2025 season rolls along. Now joined by, for the first time on this show, someone I've wanted to chat with for a long time. He's been a premier coach. He played back in his day. He comments on the game for the Nine Network, has a foundation, a really good backstory. Love to have him on. It's Roger Rasheed. Roger, welcome to the program. Long time coming.
Yeah, thanks, Mitch. Appreciate you spending some time with me.
Yeah, it's exciting to get to someone who and talk with someone who has such a vested backstory, such a cool, inspiring story in the game, and also was on the ground floor for another exciting Australian Open. So that first question, right, is what's it like now that the dust is settled and, you know, we've got some time to let it breathe. There's that adrenaline dump that players, fans, and obviously commentators, I'm assuming, have.
Yeah, I think that you're right. I think depending on where you sit, you know, when you were, it's 31, 32 days of consistent tennis around Australia, sport-loving nation like you guys. So the more the merrier. And having the world's best turn up here and I guess having the fans to be able to get close to them is really important. And having a major event in your own country, like you guys, it's massive for the sport in our country. And I think when you're a coach, it's different, you know, because and depending on the player that you're with at the time, you know, if you've got them that you're gearing them up to be in the second week and be challenging for the majors, there's a completely different type of build from a foundational point of view, and the adrenaline and the intensity is different. There's no doubt about that. And then and there's a flat spot post that. And you know, as far as once the adrenaline, the bubble bursts, and then I guess when you're commentating, depending on your level of involvement across some different sectors, you wake up early in the morning and you come home late at night, and you're just fully invested in the game and all parts of the game. And once that final ball struck and the next day rolls on, you do have a natural flat couple of days.
Yeah, you've been, not to make you, not to get into exactly how old you are, but you've been around the sport for a long time, been around the Australian Open for a long time. How just insane has it gotten? Like, how much has it grown from the time you first even were aware of it to what it was this past year?
Yeah, well, I remember walking out on in the first round when it was first at Melbourne Park. Actually, I was walking out. John Fitzgerald was playing first match, so was I, and we walked out. I think it was about 35 degrees that day. At about 11 a.m., I got stuck into a 5-set match, which I was able to get over the top of at the end. But you know, you look at that facility, and now you look at the facility changes now, and the reality was it was very much tennis invested with tennis fans initially, and then and a few observers, and now it's heavily entertainment based. It's family, it's community, it's bringing everybody to the game, and then obviously the world's best tennis players are all here. So things have changed, and they dramatically change consistently year in year out. And that's the beauty of the game, I think, and what Tennis Australia and Craig Tiley have done at the AO is they've continually tried to evolve the experience for the fans and right through to the players. And I'm sure also internally they would be getting new experiences as well.
Yeah, it's been just fun to watch from afar. Obviously, the excitement and then the players, not just the Australians, especially them, but the players certainly feed off the environment. So one of the things too, Roger, with guests on this show, especially with the playing background, is we talk about when they first kind of found tennis, when they fell in love with the sport. Your story is a little different because, by all accounts, tennis wasn't your first sporting love. That was Aussie rules football. So you started out with something that from afar, it looks like completely different than the sport of tennis, the full contact of Aussie rules football.
Yeah, it sure was. I mean, obviously, you know, Darren Cahill as well, who you obviously know, as you know, very much his father was one of a football great, so he was born in that family. But I think my parents were, you know, their first generation. They came from Lebanon, so they're Lebanese
Mhm.
parents who came over young and made way. They couldn't speak English, long way to come, and so they make their way through hospitality. So sport wasn't in their DNA really. So I just, you know, your football's very easy to pick up. Not the round ball that you guys have or NFL, but our Australian football is very easy to pick up at school. You know, you're at lunch times and you're at recess and you're on the oval and you're kicking a football. And so that was my sport really. I was playing it at a pretty high level, at a state level and a national level as a young kid. And then, and tennis was, something I played for the first time when I was just turned 12. And I picked up, there was a school competition at lunchtimes. And as you do as a kid who loves sport, you just enter everything. You get involved in everything. And a few of my mates were playing. And so I hit the tennis ball for the first time on a tennis court as a 12-year-old. And at the end of that week, I won the school tournament.
Oh,
And as you know, any kid winning something and you get a little medal, you think, oh, this is pretty cool. Not a bad sport. So that became a blended
yeah.
part of the blend. And I was fortunate enough to have an interesting journey in both areas.
12 is, like 12 is abnormally late, right, to start, especially
Yeah,
getting to the pro level. It's a very late start.
absolutely.
And I was looking at your story too. Like 12, you play, you start to have success. By 15, you go to the Newcombs Academy. And by
Yep.
16, do I have that right? You qualified for the Australian
Yep.
Open. So 4 years from like starting to main
Yeah.
draw slam. That's light years, lightning speed.
It was a bit epic in the sense that when you look back at it, and I knew at the time it was probably not normal. And you're doing it on your own. At 12, the reason I went to and I was against the trend when you come in as a 12-year-old and all of a sudden you play state tournaments,
Mhm.
you're not known. And you don't,
Mhm.
so it's sort of like, how do you earn your rights? So you don't really have any friends. All the friend groups have already been positioned. You've got all the
Yeah.
seeds turning up and you start beating a few and then you sort of follow all of a sudden you're getting seeded into a few of the events and a state team gets picked and you're in that. And so I'm sort of just enjoying the journey and trying to work out where I sort of fit. And John Newcomb's Tennis Ranch came up. There were two scholarships given to a male and a female to Newc's Tennis Ranch in New Braunfels, Texas, and
Mhm.
from Newc. And I guess I wasn't in the main crew of Australian players at that time. And so I might have just,
Mhm.
I hadn't got the runs on the board and I might have just sat underneath. And so Newc in his wisdom gave me that scholarship. And my parents wouldn't have been able to afford anything like that, to be honest. So
Yeah.
at the time, so I was lucky and I thought, oh, well, you've got to take it. So as a 15-year-old, I'm going to New Braunfels, Texas, don't know where I'm going. And I leave school at the
Yeah.
end of year 10. And also I sort of decide to leave the football journey
That
because
was it.
back
Yeah.
then, Mitch, it was all more about, you needed to sort of make the grade in tennis a lot earlier. That was the
Mhm.
stigma around, people were becoming professional tennis players a lot earlier, whereas now it's a lot tougher to do that process. So I decided to move football aside, and at the same time, as a 15-year-old, I was offered two contracts to go to big AFL clubs
Mhm.
in Melbourne to their academies,
Okay.
and so there was a bit of push and pull, but obviously I thought I'd take the tennis route first and see what that looked like, and if I was able to sort of get involved in that, great. If not, I thought I could fold back potentially at some point into football if that wasn't my journey.
Was that the first time you'd ever been to America? Had you been to America before
Yeah,
that trip?
haven't travelled anywhere really in that time. So as a 10-year-old boy, I did go back to my parents' homeland in Lebanon because it was in the middle
Okay.
of civil war, and
Yeah.
my mum's mother was not well and was dying. So my mum took my sister and I, who was a couple of years younger than me, and we actually landed in the middle of a civil war and
Mhm.
spent 6 months in the middle of a civil war. So which was quite, for a 10-year-old, it's quite
Mhm.
daunting at the time. And then interesting how you sort of live within it. You get very accustomed to what you need to do and how you need to live in and around uh, a civil war. So it's pretty daunting, but great
Yep.
experience. I loved it. Now looking back, I remember every sort of detail, and so that was the first time in
Yeah.
the US. So it was quite. I guess the fact that it was John Newcomb's Tennis Ranch, there were a few Australians there. You're young, and the experience was, to think you were going to do that. I remember my first tournament actually was like the next week. So I'm in
Yeah.
there for a week, excuse me.
Right.
And you meet about 20 different people from around the country. There were obviously some Americans there, obviously. around the world, excuse me, male and female, different so, and they, my first tournament, I remember we got in a van and we drove down to, might have been a Corpus Christi or something, um, and we're playing a tournament. And in Australia, in Adelaide, I'd play a tournament and be a 32 draw, and you get through your first 2 or 3 rounds into the quarters or semis, and you're not dropping too many games. You've got the field sort of looked after,
Right.
and I'm in a 128 draw. So this isn't a national event. It's not even the state titles of Texas, and I'm in a 128 draw. I'm obviously not seeded, and my first match goes for about 3.25 hours, 7-5 in the third. I'm thinking, holy smoke! Like, this is round one of a 128
Yeah.
draw, and it's just a local event. I ended up
Yeah.
winning that event, actually, funnily enough. But every match went to 3 sets, and that was I guess that's my welcome
Wow.
ticket to the US. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, one of the generational things that's gone is it's kind of hard to be an unknown, right? Nowadays, you're on the radar with how the game's gone global and how media and just and the top prospects know each other. But you're coming in kind of the outsider that no one knew. It's like until they're at the net shaking your hands after losing, they didn't know who
Yeah.
this guy was.
I didn't know who anyone was, and I was quite intrigued. I was very curious about who the players were that were coming to the ranch. There was some, and then obviously I wanted to sort of like, I've always heard about the 16s and, the national championships in the US, and how they're, the clay courts, the hard courts, all those sort of things. Oh, geez, I'd love to get a piece of that.
Yeah.
How do you do that? So that sort of experience, I think the competitive experience every week, virtually, and being able to do that, we were missing that here,
Yeah.
obviously, because it's a numbers game,
Hmm.
obviously, and I guess, and also the love of club tennis. We have it here, but it's sort of, again, it's magnified over there as well in country clubs
Hmm.
and academies, and so I think just having that, I loved every minute of it, and the ability to sort of travel around the country and be able to be exposed to it. At one point, Dick Stockton used to turn up to our ranch and actually spend some time at the ranch, and then there was a point where he was going to coach Trinity College. So there was a conversation I had at that time with him around, maybe going to Trinity afterwards. So I went there and watched. We'd go there and watch some
Wow.
tennis matches as well. And so the journey was, it was a pretty epic year. And then obviously I turn up back in Oz and qualify at Kooyong on the grass courts for the Aussie Open, which is, again, I wasn't ready. I was just playing tennis, so I didn't have any resources around me that were legit like they do these days. If that was the same kid now, 14, 15, 16, they've got everything around them.
Hmm.
And you can't help but be put in the right lanes if you've got some good people around you. Whereas I was sort of I was probably winging it a bit.
Do you think that was, I mean, obviously the competition level, it's hard to understate what the professional level of any sport is, but was that the hardest adjustment for you when you get to that point? You're still just a kid, you're playing the pro game, but you don't have that guidance and structure that's, I think it's safe to say, unfortunately, some players might take it for granted today, but there's such tremendous structure in the sport now as opposed to just a couple decades ago.
Yeah, I do like part of it. I liked because you had to roll up your sleeves yourself, and you had to build a resilience package and armor around you, which I don't think is there today in the modern game. To be honest, I think there's a lot of athletes out there that don't have that, and it does
Mm.
show up. There's no doubt if you want to be cutthroat about it, I'll put my coach's hat on. There's a lot that don't
Yeah.
have those things that actually really cut through. So there'll be that type of athlete that doesn't get through it, and there's people on the tour that also don't have that cut through as well. So they get restricted in the levels they can actually move. So yes, I enjoyed it, and look, in America, I had a lot of good. I had resources around, obviously, at the ranch. But when you sort of look at what they have now, once you transition from that, it's
Mhm.
quite. It's a big group. You can potentially put a big group around you, and so I had to try and build that. Once I got back home to Australia, I had to try and
Yeah.
build something that
Mhm.
actually was potentially available to me.
Well, it's interesting too. Timing is great in this one. We weren't planning on I wasn't planning on anything notable that could tie in your other background to current events, but as maybe the foremost expert on this, an Aussie football background expert, and someone that's a fan of the Davis Cup, did you keep tabs on just how heated it got this past weekend in the Davis Cup? We had a couple, and we had a couple near skirmishes. I think that also speaks to how much it matters to be playing for your country. But we had a couple skirmishes there on the Davis Cup ties.
Yeah, there's a bit of hip and shoulder, wasn't there? Chile and Belgium. I
Yeah.
saw that. It was emotions are interesting, aren't they? And
Mhm.
I guess playing for your country. I don't like I think the Davis Cup format lost its way.
Mhm.
And it needs to find its right path again. There's no doubt about that. The home and away ties, I think, are critical to the profile of the Davis Cup and what it means to other countries and even small nations that don't get the opportunity to have an event there. Um, I was against the move big time. That they went, how they changed it. So anyway, they hopefully they can find that. But yeah, I think once you play for your country, you play for your country, don't you?
Mhm.
If you're an athlete and you're a competitor, you love you love getting in there and to play with a team. Is we don't get that. So the
Yeah.
amount of times you can actually get access to that's pretty cool. But yeah, there was some good bumps. There was a good bump.
Yeah, and then that's another great example of that, right? That have home ties is huge. You saw what the atmosphere was like. We're able to kind of see why it should probably go back to the way it was. And I know you had experience around Australia, a nation that takes the tournament with the utmost honor and prestige. But in 2003, when you were with Lleyton Hewitt, Australia won the Davis Cup a lot on his shoulders. What was that experience like to be there, to be with a player that was winning the Davis Cup for his country?
Yeah, well, we had Fitzy and Wally Masur, who great mates of mine, who were the captain and the coach, and so made sure I worked hand in hand with them. So for that there was the tie that we played Switzerland in straight after the US Open, uh, and I was actually going to take Leighton off the tour actually for a while. So we were going to make sure we focused on the two Davis, potentially a Davis Cup semi and a final. Um, so Leighton comes back from 2 sets to love and Roger serving for the match at Melbourne Park with
Yeah.
a full house. It was epic. And maybe only Leighton could do that, where he could actually feel like he could still find the way. And that the conversations that were going around all of us at the time, I was just at the first, I wasn't sitting on the bench. I wanted to purposely not be involved in that, but just sit in the stands, but one removed. But um, were intriguing to watch Leighton do that. And then we actually spent Leighton and I a couple of months solid on grass, knowing that the final would be a drop in grass court at Melbourne Park. So we were off the tour, specifically making some physical body changes as well, and looking at different ways to enhance his game. But purposely spending all our time on the grass just for that one opening match
Mhm.
on day one to make sure. So there was no competition played. But it was all about that one match. So the sessions
Wow.
we were doing were quite long and epic. There were some 4 or 5 hour sessions where we were rolling different players in on the hour to go with him. Whether they were drill
So,
specific or whether they match play specific,
yeah.
but for that duration of time. And it worked out. He played a
Wow.
great first day, and yeah, so that was a pretty epic moment for Australian tennis and Davis Cup.
That's like a fight camp you described, like a boxer that just rolls through
Yeah,
sparring partners, and I'm it's kind of like we're longing for that too, right? What you just described was a top player, one of the best in the world, who focused so much on the Davis Cup. It's like, unfortunately, it seems like a lost era. I'm hoping that maybe we can get back, but it seems foreign nowadays to think that a player at the peak of his powers is so focused on that event.
yeah, and I think it was big for Leighton and big for us and big for the country.
Mhm.
So you're putting in a drop-in grass court, so it's never going to be Wimbledon, but so it was going to have almost a bit of traditional grass. So we just felt like we wanted to be the most prepared and knowing, and I also needed to
Mhm.
get his levels up so he felt like
Yeah.
he was able to compete for those
Right.
for that duration of time. And I've also been a big believer on the tour calendar finishing a lot early, so players can have a legitimate 2 months off out of the game of actual competitive sport. Do what you want outside of that, play your exhibitions, etc. But actually, legitimately have November and December
Mhm.
where they're actually legitimately off the tour, so they can establish a foundation again for long term, longevity, and also for the season ahead. So yeah, so we're always trying to buy some time throughout his career, and the players that I've worked with, just try and buy some time throughout the course of the year and at the end of the year.
We got more here with Roger Rasheed on the Inside in Tennis podcast, the coach of several top 10 players, commentator for Nine Network in Australia, and a lot to get into, especially about, Roger, your transition into coaching. You know, the pro career didn't last as long as you would have liked. Did you know it ahead of time? Did you know that coaching was going to be on the forefront, or did you kind of discover it organically that coaching was going to be your next profession?
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, I had to stop due to some spinal issues through my body. So I dealt with those as a 16-year-old onwards, really. So and so you just couldn't play long enough. It was 3 weeks on, 3 weeks off, and it was, so eventually you had to just move away. I was advised to move away from surgeons and doctors and medical staff. So then you sort of, what next? I was a bit of a bull as a worker. I loved the work. I liked working against force and pain and putting myself into those areas where I was exposing, I guess, to the mental side of it, also the physical, but more so the mental side of your capacity and building that. And that was, and so I didn't know what to do, but then I opened some gyms and worked with some individuals, and then back into tennis a bit, and sort of thought, okay, I need to be back on the court and at some level, and started helping some younger athletes, and then decided um, coaching may be my go. I actually coached a football team, an amateur football team, for a couple of years, and won a couple of premierships with them.
Yeah.
And it's not pro league, but it's still, I guess I put the pro touch on it. And so I found then I was able to sort of lead men, lead people to listening to a message, and delivering a message and control. And so that was quite powerful to me, to understand that I actually could message well and clear, and people would actually buy into that. And so, yeah, so then when I had the opportunity to get involved with Lleyton, that was, I didn't really hesitate, but I also, was very clear on what I wanted my coaching brand to look like. What was I going to stand for, and how was I
Right.
going to represent myself, and where did I want to sit? And so the number one thing is, obviously, I need to make an impact. I wanted to impact immediately. I wanted to impact every day, for the athlete, for the team around them, and try and enhance everybody in the team.
Yeah.
And so everyone gets some, value right there and then, but also, what's the long-term value look like? So it wasn't about what was in it for me. It was more about how could I actually be of value to everybody, and also give them both the current, but also the long-term view of where we're going.
Yeah, you've used the phrase, and I think it's a great one. I've never quite heard it put like this, but elite behavior, like you get
Yep.
a limited amount of time, there's only so many hours in the day, weeks in the year, et cetera, but you want to make your minutes count. We say over here a lot, like maximize your minutes, and you put a focus on, look, if we only have an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, I'm going to get the absolute most out of whatever we're working on. So if you could just expand a little on that and how that structure came to be as you started gaining more experience coaching.
I was always, before I was on when I hit the tennis court as an athlete, I was always, I used to love to get into it, and chase every ball down and do all those sort of things. I liked my time on the court. I didn't like wasting the time. I got bored when there was too much talking. I was like, let me play, let
Yeah.
me drill, let me train. And so I guess I decided that, okay, how do you spend X amount of time. We spend all this time training, and so 90% of our time is spent on training, and then we playing for 10% of the time. Really, let's just call it 10%. 90% is training. So the 90% of my no point. Your 90% has to be good. It has to be at a level that's in that sort of elite space. And there's a bit of grey. And there's some movement, but there's got to be. I feel like there's an elite area that you've got to sit yourself in, and that doesn't mean you don't have fun. Don't worry, you have a lot of fun in when I'm doing it, because there's got you want a fun element, and you want to be enjoying it and having it. But there's the delivery's got to be at a level. So when you go out to your matches and you play your matches, which is 10% of the time, you're not then trying to call on something that's not there. And
Mhm.
because if you want to
Yeah.
play a match and you want to play it at the highest level, and with the athletes that I've been fortunate enough to have, if you're playing at the pointy end of it, you're exposed to the very best in the game, and so you need to be able to be there the whole time. So mentally, you need to be able to be relevant the whole
Right.
time. So you need to train that. You can't just
Right.
think that you train that. So you train what your discipline looks like, what your delivery looks like. What's your physical involvement going to be? What level are you going to live in that area? So, and I'm a big believer in the stuff that you control, which is one of them is the physical side of it.
Mhm.
I need to be the best in the world in that area. I need my athlete to be the best in the
Mhm.
world in that area. So they're never. I'm of the opinion as a coach, I never wanted to be able to anyone to look back and go, well, we didn't tick that box. Gee, we didn't point the finger at this in this area because we could have done a little bit more of this. The only way you can really analyze true data and true information is if you have set yourself up so you're ready to go.
Mhm.
No point if you're a half fit athlete or a 3/4 fit athlete coming up, and no one can convince me you can come off the court and then start talking about I felt like I was just late on my forehand side, or I couldn't move that well to the backhand side today. Well, no shit, because
Yeah.
3 hours later, and as your body's doing this, and you're wondering why you can't move out there as well, you can't play the shots that you'd like to play when you were
Yeah.
fresh. Well, that might have a bit to do with the condition that you might be in. Am I in
Yeah.
this elite condition or not? So if I am, I don't have to worry about that. So now I can just focus on my game and what my game looks like. And so my training sessions are a little bit, they're pretty high. They're a high exposure to every ball counts, and every ball's dealt with as if it would be a match ball. From the very first ball that you get on the court with. So if you want to get out in the court and you want to practice, I don't want my player to walk on the court and practice poor habits for 10 minutes every single session,
Right.
where it's lazy feet, let ball bounce twice, not chase that one because it's just gone out. It's a meter out on the sideline. I want the whole court to be activated full time. And once you're doing that, and if you can put accountability to that, then you're training your mind, your mental position to grow. So your
Yeah.
mind can actually live in a space where it can handle the intensity of playing one of the greats every single point. Like where
Yeah.
your mind becomes tested the most. So that's how I go about it. I think the reason what it does is it maximizes your time, and then when you go out on the match court, you're not asking yourself to flick on a switch that's not, that might go green or might not.
Yeah. Right.
It's very transferable, and I guess you need to be transferable in the sport. That's my opinion.
Yeah, it makes total sense. You're not asking, the player's not asking the questions that they don't have the answers to already. They haven't put the work in. So it makes a lot of sense there. I did want to just mention a few of the players, the top 10 players that you worked with, and just speak a little bit about them. We talked about world number one Hall of Famer, two-time major champ, Lleyton Hewitt. But what can you tell us that we don't know about his resolve? I mean, you kind of said a lot in that he was the only guy that could believe he could come back from 2 sets down against Roger Federer. What was it like up close? What made him different? That desire to compete at all times.
Yeah, I guess the guys that you'll go through, they're all different.
Hmm.
Obviously, all made me they rounded me in different ways as a coach. So you learn so much from the different athletes. For Lleyton, it was, he just loved to compete. Like, put me out there. I want to compete. I want to play tennis. Like, let's have let's play a match, and it's not about. It wasn't about financial gain. It wasn't about, that all comes with it all. That's a byproduct that you're not focused on. It wasn't for him anyway, because he just loved playing the game and loved being in the competition and the battle and the different types of battles. Whether you've got Andy, you got Andy Roddick serving at you at his speeds, or you've got Roger playing, or you had Andre, or David now banned in doing what the
Yeah.
way he went about it. All those Juan Carlos. So there's great names, and he liked the challenge of all those. And I could put anything in front of Lleyton, and he would grab it, lap it up, because if it was seen to enhance his ability to be relevant and stay relevant in the game,
Mhm.
he wanted it, and he wanted to we were together wanting to work out ways of getting more out of his body type, and enhancing that, and also enhancing his game and changing the way his game looked inwardly for him. More importantly,
Yeah.
so
It was yeah.
he was easy to coach, to be honest, because in the sense that he was
Yeah.
so keen on doing the work.
Yeah. A coach's dream in a lot of ways, how hard he worked, I would think. And yeah, when you said that, it made me think, yeah, you coach, these four names that we talked about Hewitt, but they're all different. They're all unique. It's kind of a testament to how you can adapt your coaching style. Gael Monfils was the next name on the list. Earlier in his tenure, he's still going strong, won the title, and beats Taylor Fritz, gets another top 5 win in Australia. But, you look at him, you think, wow, this might be the greatest athlete the sport's seen just on a tennis court. But there was another side of it, and you saw it again in Australia, right, Roger? How cerebral he is, how he can play smart tennis when the chips are down.
Yeah, I do think he's the best athlete we've had in the game. Used to have a lot of conversations with Andy Murray on who'd win the 100 and 200. We actually talked once in Miami, Andy and I, about how good would it be if we actually had an athletics day, a track and field day
Oh,
after Miami. How good would that be? Because all the athletes would be there, and thought it'd be quite fun for the sport, but never
yeah.
got off the ground. But Gail was, he was different again. So, when he rang me and asked me, again, he was wanting to buy into some real elite behavioural stuff, that he hadn't been exposed to. He was 40 odd in the world, hadn't been anywhere near the top 10. So he was willing to invest outside of his country, where they've generally been coached by their own countrymen. And have something different. Now he had to be. There was a few non-negotiables, by the way, with me. So there had to be
Yeah.
a few non-negotiables to give him that. But also for me, it's pretty simple, Mitch. When I'm ever with any athlete,
Right.
I will ask them why they play their sport, and what's the passion about. So for Gail, there was a different type of reason than Lleyton. So once I've been able to find that out, I can then attach. I can massage things to attach to that, so we can actually make sure if there are really pure and sensitive reasons, I can attach myself to that, and we can work out a way of actually helping that athlete out in that area. But also, so for Gail, there was he was wanting to obviously help his family. There was financial stuff attached to it to help his family and big
Yeah.
picture. And then obviously, then he learned to love the sport more. I wanted him to love the sport, for what the sport was. So he quickly
Right.
made an entry into the top 10, and he lapped it up. So, but I had to give him, you've got to understand who he is, and you
Yeah.
can't take the heart and soul away of the athlete. You need to give them a lot of them, and you're just trying to add things in that they will grab onto to make them the
Yeah.
better athlete in the environment. So he was so much fun to work with, because I was learning on the way as well through him.
Mhm. Yeah, it's clear that he loves the game now, and it's awesome that you were able to, like take the big picture look as a coach, just get to know the player as a person first, and then the game follows. Sticking with that French connection too, you worked with Jo-Wilfried Tsonga, who very popular all over the world, and as a big match player, I don't think gets enough credit. Beat all 4 members of the Big Four in a major, and has victories over Federer, Djokovic, and Nadal when they were number 1. So the style was captivating, Roger. What can you tell us about working with Jo-Wilfried Tsonga?
Yeah, good point. And I'm very close to both those guys. And Joe was, I've known Joe obviously through that whole campaign with Gail, and there was a point there where we were maybe going to just work together, all 3 of us. So when that opportunity came up, it was always going to be it was never going to be a long uh, association. We actually agreed on that. It was
Mhm.
a period where Joe wanted to be readjusted and put himself back into the top 10. So make
Yeah.
those changes that actually gave himself back in the top 10, and to challenge again. So he was again very invested in. He already knew me well enough. He knew I was obviously going to have his back, and actually but I need to make a few little subtle changes in his game that was going to make that shift. There was a physical positioning of it. There's also ways, there's certain things he was doing on the court that we needed to shift, where I was showing him where the
Mhm.
points were being burnt. And again, he lapped it up. I love those guys, the way they operate. They just wanted it. Dynamic totally different dynamics, athletes to train on the same court. They're special to watch.
Yeah.
Joe, obviously, as you know, and your viewers will remember, his explosiveness forward of the court was extraordinary, as good as it gets. His ability to transition himself from baseline or just behind the baseline to on top of the net, wanting his appetite for that was off the charts. And that was great to work with, because you didn't, when you were talking about better ways to come forward and areas where he was sort of stuck in,
Right.
that were hurting him, he was just quickly grabbing all that. So yeah, we had a lot of fun, and obviously, he makes the semis of, beat Roger in the quarters of the French, and make the semis of the French. And I really thought he actually could have won the French that year. I didn't want him to be playing second match that semis day. I went really hard on with the federation to make sure that didn't happen, because in Paris, once the first semi-finals finished, the whole stadium virtually vacates and goes to lunch, especially the corporate sector.
Yeah.
And I wanted a Frenchman to walk out into a semi-finals. You think about it, Mitch. He needed to walk out to a full house, you know. Well, there was a 5-set match prior, and then he walks out to a quarter full stadium, and it was pretty deflating. I think it took a lot out of him. It took him a while to crank up in that match against Davis Ferrer. So that was the only disappointing part, because I actually really thought he could win the French from that point.
That run was special. It's very, tough to have longevity in any sport, especially tennis. You have to reinvent yourself, and you have to learn and be coachable, which all these players clearly were. And then the last one being another guy still playing, Grigor Dimitrov. And it's like you and these popular players, like very popular, well-liked around the locker room, they just gravitates towards you. But Grigor having the tools that I think a lot of coaches would dream about, just the game, the athleticism. What was it like working with Dimitrov?
Yeah, I think the beauty of those guys, you look at Gael and Grigor, that it was everyone was different. Gael was, again, he was in the 40s. Grigor was about 40 as well. So what I loved about that is, I like working with talent, with weapons. You've got to have weapons. You don't want to go to the war with a cap gun. So
Yeah.
I do like athletes with weapons or multiple weapons, because you can really move the needle with them. There's so many different ways they can play the game and develop their game to have winning outcomes. And so I like that type of athlete where they've got big picture thinking as well. So because I'm a big picture guy on the court, I see the full court, not just. And I like taking risks. I'm a risk taker as a coach as well, because I think you need to explore yourself, and the only way to do that is to be prepared to be a high risk taker in it, at times throughout your career, to see what information you get. And Grigor was the same. He was young, needed good leadership, really.
Yeah.
And my position with those young guys is to make sure you can come in and be really sort of almost be the CEO, if you know what I mean, and sort of build out the team so you've got such good foundations around them and the leadership models there, so they can follow, and then eventually you want them to be the leaders, where your voice becomes really quite small and you're only sort of just nipping in, but they're now got the reins.
Yeah.
And that's what the tennis court's like, right? You need to be able to problem solve and do a lot of things yourself. So it's really important to give them those tools. And Grigor was, again, he was wanting to be better. I needed him to see tennis through a different lens, and understand how all his attributes, and how could you shape them? What did you need to do on the court to get your wins versus, do I need to be a highlights reel on ESPN? But I've lost 6-3, 6-3, or am I not the highlights reel? Am I not the highlights reel, and I'm just, there's a little small package and you've won 6-4, 6-4. So once again, there was a physical component that needed to be added. That was the standout. So also had seen Grigor for 3 years, so I also know where the deficiencies were. And so that physical component, once we were able to put that in play, and then use his tools better, he would quickly became the player. Our very first tournament he won in Stockholm, and I gave him a few non-negotiables in matches that were that were really against what he saw on the court, but wow, did it straighten him up? It still gave him his flair, but it straightened him up, and he beat David Ferrer from a set and a breakdown. And David was about 3 in the world at the time, and to win the Stockholm Open, his first title on the tour. And then from there on, he wasn't long. He was in the top 10. So, and our relationship was, is a great relationship. We're still very close now as well. We speak a lot, and there was a time that I need to step off to be dad to my daughter. There was always going to be that time, and so that's what removed me from the tour really, as a full-time person. But I've loved watching. Now Grigor's in his mid-30s, right? So, it moves quickly. But again, I've the privilege of being able to have those guys and actually be able to, I guess, mold them and also give them some stuff that's that's outside the court. More personal development, more so than anything else.
Right. And just the last thing on the coaching thing, how do these players, because you mentioned it a few times, like you just kind of know their deficiencies, where they're lacking. How receptive are these players when you start? It's like, okay, we're going to start to work. This is where you got to be better. This is where you're not good right now. We can build that up. But what's the reaction from a top player to news of, look, you're struggling in this specific area?
I guess it's pretty simple. I'm pretty black and white with, it's why am I the guy? Like, why would you want me? Do you really, I'm an impact. I like the impact. Like, do you want to make a real impact? You've got a small moment in the sport. So do you make a real impact or you don't? Or do you want to be safe? If you want to be safe, you can sit here, no problems. And get someone who wants to be safe with you, and that will be your space. You have some growth, but if you want to really challenge, you've got to look at areas. So there was no negativity around that. That was more about, here we are now. Here are the areas that I think and I virtually would say to my players, what number's near your name? What do you see? What's the number? So with Grigor, it was the same thing. I remember saying to him in one of our very first meeting in LA, we had spent a couple of days in LA. I told him I didn't think I was going to be the guy, but anyway, I was testing him a little bit there. And I said to him, what number's near your name? And I said, what do you think your number could be? And he sort of said, well, I actually seriously think I could have a number 1 near my name. And I thought, oh, that's great. And I agreed with him. He could definitely be a single figure guy. And obviously at that time you've got Roger and Rafa, and so it's a bit of a tough climate, but I loved where he thought he could be. And he had the tools. He's got a whole weaponry that's, he's got. And so then I just build that out. And so with the number, whichever number they think's near their name, I'll build that out for them and say, well, that number, this is what the build looks like. If you want, you're here, and this is what that would require. Are you interested in investing in that area? And if you're interested in investing in that area and you're legit, well then, great, you can go to work, and you've all signed off on it. So I'm a big believer first in getting them to. They need to be the people. It's not about you telling them what you think. Where do they want to go with their sport? What are they looking for? And once they give you that, then you can start building around that, and then you together you talk around the different areas and how we're going to make that play, and then we go to work. So when I talk about areas, when they ask me, oh, what do you think of my game? And I give them, well, this happens and this happens, this happens. So you're leaking this many points against the best guys. I'm not really interested in what you're doing. I want, if you think you're one of the best, you could be one of the best guys. Well, let's put you up against the best guys. This is where you leak. So how do we actually deal with all that? And they're smart. They can see it. And if they're competitive enough and they want that space, they'll enjoy that journey. It's a pretty cool journey to be on, by the way.
Certainly seems like
as I said to Gael, I said, Gael, you're born to entertain on the big courts. You're just born to entertain on the big courts. You can't be sitting on court 12 or court 6.
Yeah.
Wherever you are, whichever country you're in, you shouldn't be on an outside court. You should be on a feature court. So that's where you're going to be inspired and play your best tennis with a bigger audience in bigger matches, the end of the week, those sort of things, Davis Cup. And so, which is pretty true. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very insightful stuff there. Roger Rasheed here on the Inside In Tennis podcast. Wrapping up with just a couple things for him. Obviously, working now as a broadcaster. Great, phenomenal work there for the Nine Network courtside. A lot of these matches offering insightful stuff, but you got to cover the men's tournament. A lot of good matches. Jannik Sinner wins again. Djokovic has the run. Alcaraz tripped up by him in the quarterfinals. But what's your thoughts on kind of the back end of this Australian Open? Sinner wins another title. Where the men's game is right now as we kick off 2025.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, obviously Yannick, I think currently sits just above at the moment. He's sitting on it. I think he's just sitting on his own slightly. You know, he's at dinner just slightly removed on the table.
Yeah.
In the sense that, you know, his results show that. I think the way he's playing, he's a lot more structured up as an athlete. Um, you know, I think Darren Cale's brought an enormous amount of that resilience, resolve, that ability to compete, and regardless of your circumstances, how can you stay in the
Hmm.
match? You roll your sleeves up. That's. I think Darren's brought a lot of that to Yannick, and giving him an understanding that's what it takes in these 2 weeks to do that. Whether it's on the practice court, whether it's on the match court, certain matches you've got to have a resolve that can take you through moments where at other times you might find a little bit of mental weakness, and you might want to go the other side. So Yannick, you can see that now. He does a great job in that. The way he's hitting the ball, he hits the ball big from every part of the court, literally every part of the court. There's a
Yeah.
big ball that he hits. So he can actually hit, you know, he can hit a winner from most parts of the court. There's nowhere you can sort of play that safe with Yannick at the moment. His serve's improved. You know, so I think the way he throws his game towards his opponent at the moment is quite, it's intense. You know, it's an intense inferno when he's on, and he's got a real big belief. So I love Carlos because his game's can just taking a little bit more time to structure up and
Yeah.
mold, and he play. You know, again, he sees a different game through his lens. Everyone sees the court through their own lens, and so until you know what they're looking at, it's hard to work. You got to work with their tools, and so. But he plays with enthusiasm. I like the combination. You know, we want to have contrasting styles. That's the
Perfect.
beauty of
Yeah.
the game. It's having contrasting styles. So, you know, and then, you know, I think then there's a group obviously there with Zverev. I think there's still areas. I still think there's big areas for him that haven't been dealt with, that need to be really dealt with, and I
Right.
think they show up at the critical moments. But he's having obviously a stellar career, but there's one step he'd like to
Hmm.
climb, and he works hard. And and then there's a group. I think that there's a group that there's some players that are comfortable that in the
Yeah.
tennis environment, and comfort does come into it at some level, at some stage after a certain amount of years. So, and then there's that young core, the younger generation that we saw at the Australian Open,
Yeah.
that have sort of stuck their hand up as well. And we'll just be, I'm interested. They're an interesting observation because they're a stopwatch, aren't they? They're a
Hmm.
be patient. They're a stopwatch. You can come on the tour and have a little involvement, and then there's a maturity around your body, your mind, your group, and what your schedule looks like, and the consistency that you can build, long term. So I think the game's in a healthy spot, and there's no doubt it's in a healthy spot. I would love a more all-round type of game to be uh, played on the tour. I think we've got a real coaching issue globally because we coach. There's not enough coaching that's coached holistically. So
Hmm.
from a young age, where they coach the full court, I think
Okay.
the full court doesn't get coached. So you just develop a whole lot of athletes that play robotically off the back of the court. And then you get the
Yeah.
Alcarazes out of nowhere. That they can come out. So I'd love the game to be taught
Yeah.
equally. To be honest.
Yeah, it's something that's been said by a lot of players too at the top that we want some variety, and I think you're dead on there. You got to train your mind. You got to be able to think out there in the key moments too. So
I'll give you
yeah,
one reason.
yeah,
It's it's almost there'll be a match that's played,
right,
and you'll have a player that has to come in off some shorts. They won't force themselves in, but they're forced to come in. and they won't know what type of shot to play to get an outcome, or they'll come in and they'll have to play 4 or 5 volleys throughout the course of the match, but one of them might be on a break point. Now they're rabbit in headlights as they walk into the net because they just haven't spent enough time in the area. So that real estate they've barely stepped into. So then in the biggest moments, this 10% of time that you spend in match courts, you'll have so many moments like that cost you the
Yeah.
break a serve or a match. And that's the farcical part for me, is that the lack of exposure in the forward half of the court, and how to even, why not give yourself some information around that? That's where I think the
Yeah.
game's got growth ability and
Right.
a change in the game in the future.
Yeah, I won't name any names, but you were calling a lot of these matches, and I watched a few times where there were players that would take 2 steps up and literally take 2 steps back, like would not come to the net. So I
Yeah,
think we were watching some of the same matches there, and you were on site
yeah,
for a few. But no, it's interesting to have that perspective. I did want to wrap up with this, though. You've been a tremendous guest, Roger Rasheed, here on the Inside in Tennis podcast. You founded the foundation in 2010, the Roger Rasheed Sport Foundation, a not-for-profit organization that provides facilities and opportunities for the disadvantaged youth all over Australia. Very great, noble cause. What inspired you to do this? Because a lot of people understand this issue, Roger, but you actually went the extra mile to start a foundation. What inspired you to do just that?
yeah. Thanks, Mitch. Look, you're being blessed when you're with sport. You're around sport as a young kid, and then the journey that I've been on. I'm still around. I consult now, and so I'm still involved in high performance and consulting, not just for tennis, just for other athletes and coaches. I love the space. I love impacting people and having people become successful. So whatever level that looks like, and why can't you do that to, there are kids around in America, everywhere around the world, that don't get access to sport at all. And when I mean access to it, they won't own a ball. They'll never have they won't have a bike. They'll never own a soccer ball or a tennis racket. So there's the 80% of disadvantaged kids, extreme disadvantaged kids, never touch sport ever, in Australia, which is a staggering statistic. So think of the health implications, but also the putting them in a path where there's some blue sky and there's healthy activity. So I thought, oh well, I've got to make change in that. So in extreme communities, Mitch, the reality is there are no opportunities. It's cycles. It comes and goes in cycles, and that you can't get off the roundabout because the parents of those kids were the kids, and they were in the same position as well. And who's I guess who's the Pied Piper? You need a Pied Piper. So I worked with those communities, those councils, to get some open space and basically put some infrastructure in where it's open space park,
Right.
and whether it's skate parks and have tennis courts on there, which can be multi-purpose, all those sort of things. And then we give coaching free 5 days a week through the course of the year, so kids can come and have free coaching with the same coaches. We're really building a trust umbrella, and which is life really. It's like anything in life. It happens, at the highest level in tennis, you build your trust team, and build a trust umbrella where the kids can actually come and they have the same coaches, so they start to trust them. There's communication. There's free tennis lessons. There's free skateboarding lessons. And so every week it's regular. So all of a sudden they've got a schedule. And the extreme community, they don't have schedules. A lot of them don't go to school that much, and the change in these people in these communities, Mitch, is extraordinary. It's staggering. The crime and violence comes down.
Yeah.
Drug usage comes down. All these sort of things. The family's interaction changes. Parents from the community start to turn up to watch their kids doing these sports because they couldn't provide the opportunities, and now
Yeah.
they're interacting. So it just really shapes a community. It's broader. We just use sport as the medicine to do that.
Well,
And the kids end up. We've got kids now that are coaches. That have done coaching courses, and so it's staggering outcomes. And I love it. It's easy to do. You just need buy-in from the community and the council. And you just spend a bit of time, and you can set things up so they can take ownership of it. It's pretty cool.
it's awesome giving back in your position. Also, just encouraging kids to be more active, whether they go on a pro journey of their own, or whether they just become better and more fit human beings that learn to love life. Either outcome is amazing. So a testament to the work you put in. Roger Rasheed, this was a blast. Thanks for coming on the podcast. A coach, a broadcaster. Also, I know a proud athletic parent now. Your daughter, India, is a great Aussie rules football player too. So I don't know how you watch sports, but maybe as a parent, I don't know if you're on the chill side or if you're just as intense as a parent.
No, pretty. I love my daughter's journey. That's why I came off the tour to be a big supporter of that, and so that was really important to me. But so I love her journey. I watch it. Obviously, you have a different eye because you understand the pathway. But I'm pretty calm. She's got me covered, mate. She's she's got me covered. She's got all my skill in her little finger, so it's a fun watch.
That's funny. Well, Roger Rasheed, this was a blast. Really respect what you've done for the tennis community, also outside the sport. Thanks for coming on the Inside In Tennis podcast. We'll have to do this again soon. All the best.
Appreciate it, Mitch. Thanks, mate.
That was Roger Rasheed. This was the Inside In Tennis podcast. We're available on all your platforms. Just go to Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a nice rating or a review, and check out every episode in video form on my YouTube channel at Mitch Michaels for all the video episodes as well. All part of the Believe Network. We're back a little later on this week. Another episode coming down the pike. The grind doesn't stop for the tennis season. So I hope you enjoyed this episode with Roger Rasheed. I'm your host, Mitch Michaels. This was the Inside In Tennis podcast. I'll talk to you soon.